was the boogeyman.
As a matter of fact, it was.
The most frightening thing John Carpenter ever created was not Michael Myers. It was the idea that evil could be waiting on the street you call home. After Halloween, quiet neighborhoods felt different. A house at the end of the block suddenly seemed worth watching. And once night fell, ordinary streets never felt quite as ordinary again. There's something different about Halloween. Maybe it's the autumn air, the glow of porch lights against the darkness, or the way ordinary neighborhoods seem to carry a little more mystery than they do the rest of the year. For one night, familiar streets become places where imagination runs a little further, and every shadow feels as though it might be hiding a story. John Carpenter understood that feeling better than almost anyone. Rather than filling the screen with elaborate monsters or haunted castles, he looked towards something much more familiar. Quiet neighborhoods, modest homes, children walking from door to door, and the comforting routines of a normal October evening. Then he quietly turned those ordinary places into somewhere we were no longer sure we could trust. That's the quiet brilliance of Halloween. It doesn't ask us to believe in another world. It simply asks us to look at our own a little differently. A house at the end of the street suddenly feels worth noticing. A figure standing in the distance lingers just a little too long. The silence between footsteps becomes as important as the footsteps themselves. For nearly 50 years, Halloween has returned every October, not simply because it introduced an unforgettable movie villain, but because it captured a feeling we've all experienced at one time or another. The feeling that something familiar has quietly become unfamiliar. And once that feeling settles in, it never completely leaves. The first image in Halloween is not Michael Myers as the audiences would come to know him. It's a house. A quiet suburban home, its windows glowing against the darkness of a Halloween night. The camera approaches slowly, almost cautiously. For the next several minutes, we don't simply watch the story unfold. We experience it through someone else's eyes. We move through the kitchen, climb the staircase, and then we do something unthinkable. John Carpenter designed the opening as one continuous flowing sequence. Using the Panaglide, an early camera stabilization system, he allowed the audience to glide through the Myers house without the usual cuts or interruptions. For a production shot in just over 3 weeks on a remarkably small budget, it was an ambitious creative decision that immediately announced Halloween as a film that would rely on atmosphere and technique rather than spectacle. The sequence does far more than introduce Michael Myers. It places us inside a memory that Haddonfield has spent 15 years trying to forget. When the mask is finally removed and the figure beneath it is revealed to be a young boy, the moment lingers not because of what we see, but because of what we don't understand. Carpenter offers no explanation, only silence. Michael stands beneath the porch light, while the ordinary house around him is transformed forever. By 1978, the Myers house has become a part of Haddonfield's folklore. Children dare one another to walk up to it. Adults avoid talking about it for very long. It is no longer simply another abandoned home. It has become a reminder that some places never stop holding on to the past. Before Laurie Strode ever catches sight of the shape, Halloween has already whispered its first warning. Some memories never leave the places they were made. 15 years after the night inside the Myers house, the story begins again in the rain. Dr. Samuel Loomis arrives at Smiths Grove Sanitarium, expecting to help transfer Michael Myers. Instead, he finds patients wandering across the grounds beneath flashes of lightning, their white hospital gowns glowing in the darkness. Somewhere among them, Michael is already moving towards freedom, and Loomis knows exactly where he's going. That certainty gives Donald Pleasance's performance its weight. He does not play Loomis as a doctor still searching for answers. He plays him as a man who believes he's already found one and wishes he had not. For years, Loomis has watched Michael in silence, waiting for some sign of guilt, emotion, or recognition. He found nothing he could understand. Carpenter originally hoped to cast a recognizable actor who would give the small independent film credibility. Pleasance brought exactly that, but he also gave Halloween something more important: conviction. His calm, deliberate warnings make the danger feel larger before Michael has ever returned to the screen. Loomis believes the threat is real, so the audience begins to believe it too. Michael's escape is presented without spectacle. There's no grand announcement, only confusion, rain, and an empty place where he should have been. Soon, A stolen car is moving through the night, carrying him back toward the town that has spent 15 years turning him into a story. By morning, Haddonfield is preparing for Halloween. Children walk to school. Pumpkins sit on porches. The Myers house remains empty. No one knows that the figure from its past is already nearby. Loomis is following, but he's always one step behind. And while the town looks forward to costumes and candy, something it thought had been locked away is quietly coming home. Laurie Strode enters Halloween carrying an armful of school books. There is nothing dramatic about her introduction. She walks through Haddonfield thinking about homework, babysitting, and concerns of an ordinary day. While her friends talk about dates and plans, Laurie is quieter, more careful, and easier to underestimate. She is ordinary, but that's what makes her important. Laurie is not written as someone waiting to become a hero. She is responsible because that's who she is. She remembers what others forget. She notices when something feels wrong, when a pale figure begins appearing at the edge of her day, behind a hedge, outside a classroom window, across the street. She cannot dismiss the feeling that she is being watched. For Jamie Lee Curtis, Laurie Strode was a beginning. Halloween was her first feature film, and her casting carried a connection to horror history. Her mother, Janet Leigh, had become immortalized through Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Carpenter recognized that connection, but Curtis earned the role by giving Laurie a grounded, believable quality the film desperately needed. She never plays Laurie as larger than life. Her fear arrives gradually, in glances, pauses, and the way her confidence begins to thin. Curtis makes Laurie feel like someone the audience might know, a dependable friend, a thoughtful daughter, the babysitter parents trust without hesitation. And that trust becomes the emotional center of the film. Michael may be the figure audiences remember first, but Laurie gives his presence meaning. We understand Haddonfield through her eyes. We feel the safety of the neighborhood because she believes in it, and we feel that safety begin to disappear because she notices it happening. By the time Laurie looks across the street and sees the shape staring back, Halloween has found its heart, and Jamie Lee Curtis has found the role that will define her. By late afternoon, Haddonfield has become the version of Halloween people remember. Children hurry home with paper masks and plastic pumpkins. Leaves gather along sidewalks. Porch lights wait to be switched on. And inside living rooms, monster movies play on TV while parents make plans and babysitters settle in for the night. The atmosphere feels effortless, but much of it had to be created. Although the story is set in Illinois, Halloween was filmed in Southern California during the spring. The crew avoided palm trees, dressed yards to resemble the Midwest, and scattered painted leaves across streets that were far greener than they appeared. Because the production could not afford endless replacements, those leaves were gathered after each shot and used again. That resourcefulness gave Haddonfield a handmade quality, but it also made the town feel authentic. Nothing looks polished enough to feel artificial. The houses are modest. The bedrooms are cluttered. The streets feel lived in. And Debra Hill helped give the people inside those homes the same sense of familiarity. Her dialogue between Laurie, Annie, and Linda is casual, funny, and full of interruptions. They sound less like characters delivering information and more like teenagers filling the silence of an ordinary day. That natural rhythm matters because Halloween spends so much time letting us feel the comfort of the neighborhood before taking it away. As night falls, Laurie arrives to babysit Tommy Doyle. Across the street, Annie watches Lindsay Wallace. Children move from door to door beneath masks, unaware that another masked figure is moving through the same streets. For a little while, Haddonfield feels warm, but the houses are beginning to close around the people inside them. And once the porch lights go dark, every familiar window starts to look like a place where something could be waiting. Michael Myers does not enter Halloween like a traditional villain. He is rarely introduced with a dramatic reveal. More often, he's already there, standing across the street, half hidden behind a hedge, framed in a doorway, watching from the edge of the image while everyone else continues through the day unaware. That choice is what makes the shape feel less like a man and more like a presence. The mask was found almost by accident. Production designer Tommy Lee Wallace purchased an inexpensive Captain Kirk mask, removed the sideburns, widened the eye holes, teased the hair, and painted the face a lifeless white. Stripped of expression, it became impossible to read. Michael could appear calm, curious, or completely empty, depending on the angle and the light. Nick Castle, one of Carpenter's friends from film school, wore the mask for many of Michael's scenes. He was not asked to perform with theatrical menace. He simply walked, stood still, and moved with unnerving patience. That restraint gave Michael weight. He never seemed hurried because the film makes him feel inevitable. Carpenter and cinematographer Dean Cundy often place him deep in wide compositions, forcing the audience to search the frame. A patch of darkness becomes suspicious. An open doorway feels occupied. Even when Michael is absent, we begin expecting him to appear. This is how Halloween changes the viewer. We stop watching only Laurie and start scanning every window, hallway, and shadow around her. Michael's power comes from what the film refuses to explain. The blank mask offers no emotion. The silence offers no motive. There's nothing familiar enough to understand. By the time the night settles over Haddonfield, the shape no longer feels like someone moving through the neighborhood. He feels like the darkness, and the darkness is everywhere. As Halloween night grows quieter, the music begins to take over. Laurie is still moving through familiar houses and familiar rooms, but the score tells us those places are no longer safe. A few repeating piano notes begin, simple enough to remember after hearing them once, yet uneven enough to keep the listener unsettled. John Carpenter composed the music himself. Working with limited time and money, he could not rely on a large orchestra or an elaborate recording process. Instead, he built the score with synthesizers, sparse percussion, and repetition. The main theme moves in an unusual 5-beat pattern, inspired in part by a rhythm Carpenter's father had taught him on the piano. It never seems to settle into the steady pulse we expect, creating the feeling that something is always slightly wrong. That rhythm becomes inseparable from Michael. Sometimes it announces its presence. Sometimes it appears before Laurie understands what is happening. At other moments, Carpenter removes the music entirely, allowing breathing, footsteps, or silence to hold the tension. The score is effective because it knows when to enter and when to disappear. As Laurie begins to realize that her friends are no longer answering, the music tightens around her. The neighborhood remains still, but the theme creates movement beneath the silence, as if the night itself is advancing. Carpenter later described the score as essential to making the film frightening. Without it, early scenes reportedly felt far less effective. The music gave the images a pulse they did not have on their own. By the time Laurie crosses the street, the theme is no longer simply accompanying the shape. It has become a part of him. The mask gives Michael a face. The shadow gives him somewhere to wait. But the music gives him a presence that can follow us even after the screen goes dark. By the time Laurie crosses the street, Haddonfield has gone almost completely silent. The houses are still close together, but they no longer feel connected. Lights glow behind curtains. Televisions continue playing. Yet Laurie seems to be moving through a neighborhood that is quietly withdrawn from her. What follows is not built around spectacle. Carpenter narrows the film into hallways, staircases, locked doors, and the sound of Laurie trying to stay one step ahead. Jamie Lee Curtis keeps the fear human. Laurie is not fearless. She is exhausted, confused, and trying to protect the children who still believe the boogeyman is only a story. That makes her courage more powerful. At the same time, Dr. Loomis is still searching. Donald Pleasance carries the weight of someone who has spent years warning people about something they could not imagine. When he finally reaches the house, Laurie and Loomis become two sides of the same realization. One has just discovered what Michael is, while the other has feared it all along. Then comes one of the most unforgettable moments in horror history. Dr. Loomis arrives just as Laurie has reached her breaking point. He bursts in the room to see Michael standing over her and fires. The shape stumbles backward and crashes to the second-story balcony railing. For a brief moment, it seems that the nightmare is finally over. But when Loomis steps onto the balcony and looks down, the lawn is empty. Michael is gone. There's no dramatic chase, no final explanation, only silence. Carpenter lets the camera drift across the familiar places we've come to know. Quiet bedrooms, empty hallways, front porches, and dark streets, all while Michael's breathing echoes over each image. The shape is nowhere to be seen, yet somehow he feels closer than ever. That ending helped turn Halloween into far more than a successful independent film. Made for roughly $300,000, it earned over $70 million worldwide and created a blueprint that countless horror films would follow. But its legacy comes from more than influence. It comes the way the story refuses to end. Every October, the music returns, the mask appears again, and somewhere, at the end of a quiet street, it feels as though the shape could still be watching. Every October, Halloween returns to familiar places. The porch light comes on. Leaves gather along the curb. Children move from house to house beneath masks, while old movies flicker in darkened living rooms. For a few hours, ordinary neighborhoods feel suspended between comfort and uncertainty. That is the world John Carpenter captured in 1978. He did not need grand sets, elaborate explanations, or an enormous budget. He needed a quiet town, a patient camera, a few unforgettable notes, and a young actress who made the audience care about what happened to her after the sun went down. Jamie Lee Curtis gave Laurie Strode warmth before she gave her courage. Donald Pleasance gave the danger a voice. Nick Castle gave the shape a body. Debra Hill gave Haddonfield people who sounded real. And John Carpenter brought those pieces together with the confidence to leave certain questions unanswered. That restraint is why the film still works. Michael Myers has appeared in sequels, remakes, and countless imitations, but the original remains powerful because it feels less like a story being told and more like a memory being revisited. A house at the end of the street, a figure behind a hedge, a melody that begins before we know why. Halloween changed horror, but it also changed October. It taught audiences to look more carefully at quiet windows and empty sidewalks. And even now, when the night grows still, part of us is still watching the end of the street, looking for a shape in the darkness.